don't fast forward the process. You could potentially be walking in the greatest days of maximizing the assignments that God has on your life.
Everything in God's eyes is a 5-star assignment. I'm in a pit, but yet I know that I have a calling.
In those moments, there's still a ton of wrestling, wondering, why am I in this condition or position?
I choose to see the perspective that God is with me. Your best is not behind you. It's right before you. And it's not tomorrow, it's today. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Armchair Authentic, a podcast with Rhett and Justin, trying to help you fulfill your God assignments by having real conversations about real life with real people. And Justin, really excited about the conversations that we've been having lately, and specifically when it comes to this episode.
Yeah, there's something to be said for making the most of every opportunity. I think it's a superpower. If you can recognize the ordinary and see how fully packed it is, that it's not just something to throw away and try to pursue to get to the next thing that seems really epic. These are the moments where you're really constructed into the building that God's building up.
Yeah, absolutely. And we live in a microwave society, but we serve a crock pot God when it comes to development, when it comes to process, when it comes to us fulfilling the purpose and assignments that he has for us. And we really delve into a lot of this today on this podcast, and really excited to jump into it.
Yeah, I really am too. This is something you and I have both experienced as being a secret sauce as we've progressed in our life and ministry and in our family. When you buy into the power of the ordinary, some extraordinary things await.
And so if you find yourself today in the middle of the mundane, in the middle of the ordinary, working your 9 to 5, working at the restaurant, wherever you might find yourself in life, and you find yourself at maybe a stalemate going, man, why am I here? And am I ever going to get out of this and on to the next, whatever that next might be for what you're dreaming about, what you're hoping for your family, for your finances? This episode's for you, man, because not only do we look at what the Word of God says about how we can get through these situations, we also speak about our own life and about the process of just the things we've gone through and developed to make the most of every single moment, even if it is mundane right now. Everything in God's eyes is a 5-star assignment. In our eyes, according to what people aren't seeing or are seeing, we might believe we're that 1-star review on Google. Right? But God sees that 1 star and says, no, man, I see 5 stars. I don't see the 1.
That's right.
In that process, in that season, in that moment, which takes me to Joseph's life. And I know that's a story that resonates with both of us because
very much.
God gave a dream to Joseph. You can read about it in Genesis, right? And here, Joseph, in all the Bible scholars out there, I'm a pastor, but in conversations, sometimes I might not get all the stats right. But I believe Joseph was about 16 or 17 years old when he was given the dream by God. And that dream was, oh man, you're going to do great things. Here's the paraphrase. All your family's going to bow down to you. Everybody, you're going to do something so great that all these things are going to happen and people are going to come to you and bow at you because it just represented greatness.
Yeah.
And Joseph, in his immaturity, was out running his mouth to brothers. He was already the baby. He already had favor from the father. His father has already kind of showed a lot of this favoritism to him by making him this incredible coat that made him stand out. And he was the baby. And of course, if you've got multiple kids, the baby's the one that's always gets away with everything. My son's an only child, and I was an only child, so I didn't get away with nothing. It was all my fault. Where's the remote, Rhett? I didn't touch it. Yeah, well, I didn't move it. And same thing with the only kid. But when you've got, several brothers and you're the baby and you have that favor from his father, his brothers didn't already like him. And so now that he has this dream and he's sharing this dream in a kind of an immature way, open his mouth and sharing this dream, and probably in with a little bit of immaturity mixed in, a lot of zeal, not a lot of wisdom. What happens next? His brother's like, well, we're going to take this kid out. He thinks he's going to be something. I'll show you, we're going to kill him. But instead of killing him, they throw him into a pit and sell him into slavery. Now, if I'm Joseph, I'm thinking, okay, was that dream from God? Because this is not a moment that I would have ever thought that would have ever set me up for success for that dream that I thought was from heaven.
Well, it's humility and humiliation. They very much go together.
Yeah.
And sometimes it will manifest itself through humiliation. I can only imagine, yes, it would have been scary. You just got taken away from your family. But if you were aspiring to be the next big thing and you just got sold to slavery in those days, huge humiliation factor. Because he's thinking, okay, I thought this was going to happen a certain way, and let's put a less serious touch on it. It's you right now who's listening, and you're sitting in your cubicle.
Exactly.
And you're thinking, at what point did I lose control? At what point did the dream die? Potentially, you're not recognizing that God is at work right now.
Or you're a student who's working at a fast food restaurant thinking, what in the world? I want to become all these things, and I've got these gifts and these aspirations and inspirations, and here I am, having to work not a 9 to 5, but probably weekends and nights. Or it could be any situation where you feel like you're stuck and like, okay, this is not what I thought life was going to be.
Yeah.
It's in those moments where, when we look at Joseph's life, who was solid and knew he had heard from God and knew that he had an assignment on his life and didn't quite understand what that dream was all about, but knew he had something he was called to greatness. Yeah. But yet he's in a pit. And for him, it was a literal pit with brothers who were trying to kill him. By the grace of the Lord, all the brothers stood up, said, no, let's not do that. And so they ended up selling him to slavery. And in every moment, here's what I think is just so incredible. It was like, of course, we had the beauty of hindsight when we read this story, because we look back and go, oh, well, I mean, of course, it all worked out in the end, which we'll get to. But it says in every moment, the Lord was with him. In other words, he had, even with the immaturity, he had the trust in his father to know that, okay, I'm in a pit, but yet I know that I have a calling. And in this pit, I choose to see the perspective that God is with me, being sold into slavery. You would have thought, okay, all right, well, that's the worst, right? But then he's like, no, I choose to see God in these moments. And he made the most of every moment, so much so in his faithfulness as a slave, he became the greatest slave, which was the right-hand man to Potiphar, which basically he ran his whole house. He managed everything. Now he was a slave, but yet here he is, like, living his best life even as a slave. I know that's hard to understand in our culture and our mindset today, but it was a high-ranking position for a high-ranking official, at that time. But why? Because he chose to see God in those mundane, hard moments, the 9 to 5, the fast food restaurant, the moving truck.
And we can speculate safely. The Bible doesn't go into this, but we know human condition. He trusted God, but we know if he's anything like me, in those moments, there's still a ton of wrestling. Oh, you're at your desk right now wondering, why am I in this condition or position, or why? There's no telling the mental anguish he was going through, but it's what he did in the mental anguish. He came to a resolve at some point where he didn't give up, and he decided to see God in his current situation.
In his mind, he probably, I would think, right-hand man to Potiphar at a high position. Maybe this was the dream, because I have people coming to me, all these things, right? But the family dynamic part of the dream where his family's coming to him, that's obviously not happening. Yeah. But you got to think, I mean, he's human, so he's probably processing this. But we know that his faith and trust in God is huge and a part of his life, because he's faced, even at that moment, with, Potiphar's wife comes and tries to make a move on him. Yep. And his eyes are so set and focused on who his God is and who he is and his identity in those moments that he was like, how could I ever do such a simple thing in the eyes of my God, or even into my, master, which was Potiphar at the time? But he was faithful, and he ran and he fled from what could have been a disastrous end to the dream, and even saving ultimately a nation.
And he probably, as you heard in episode 7, he probably had that word in his mind. Akmalatizo.
Yeah.
Which is the tip of the spear when you execute that thought.
Yep.
When it comes in. He had a practice of executing negative thoughts for years, I bet, from the sense of feeling abandoned from the people he trusted the most. And now when she makes her appearance, I can imagine, as beautiful as they come, that's what she probably was to Joseph. But because his mind was in that state of not weakness, akmalatizo,
Well, it says that there were moments where she would he could tell that she was trying to make moves on him, and he never found himself alone with her. And then there was that moment where the house was empty. He's in there managing the household, whatever. At that moment, if you think about it, he probably, in hindsight, would have, I should have never walked in the house.
Yeah.
I should have had somebody with me.
And she's all singing the soundtrack in her head, like, he's playing hard to get.
Right. And so in that moment of nobody's there, which is a lesson to be learned, always have an accountability around you. And so he runs for it when she tries to make a move on in the house by themselves, right? And then she grabs onto that darn coat. It's that darn coat that gets into the trouble. Got him in trouble with his brothers, in trouble with a lady, and gets accused. So, by the way, back up. I mean,
different coat, to be clear.
Yeah, we all
have a different coat because they put blood all over the
other
true.
One. It's just the coat.
Something about that coat.
Something about that coat, man. But if you think about it, though, it's like we go through hard times in our life. But at last time I checked, I haven't been sold into human trafficking and slavery. Yeah. And I know some people have, but I'm just going, man, when you think of the perspective that he's gone through to keep God in the forefront, to keep his perspective on God and in the dream, and knowing that no matter what moment he's in, he just makes the most of it. Mm-hmm. And those are the assignment. And some people are like, well, his assignment wasn't the pit and wasn't that. Well, God used it. God did. And that goes back to me on the moving truck. I realized if we maximize every moment to learn in this season, where I'm at, and I think if we're helping people fulfill their assignment in life, where they are right now might not be their ultimate assignment, but there is something to be learned in the misery, in the mundane, in the ordinary moments is where we become extraordinary, when we walk humbly with our God and deny ourselves and just make the most of every moment. And when we do that, of course, we see this in Joseph's life. He does get falsely accused. He does get put in prison. One step forward, two steps back. You got to be thinking, oh man, I had it well, and then I get accused, and now I'm back in a prison, and here I am. And we see God with him in every mundane moment, but then God obviously uses his gift, which was what?
Interpreting dreams.
And the moment came.
Yep, the moment came. He's now put in prison, probably in a worse condition than it was when he was a slave being sold to Potiphar's house. And somewhere in there, the supreme leader, two of his chief guys, the cupbearer and the baker, get thrown into prison. Mm-hmm. We know that at some point, Joseph had also built the same favor he did with Potiphar, because he was over the prison, basically.
I mean, he made the most of being in prison, falsely accused, going, hey, you know what? I'm not blaming God. I'm not getting mad. I'm just going, all right, you know what? God is with me. Yeah. And it says that everywhere he went, God, because he chose to see it. And because he did, he made the most of that. What people would go, that's not an assignment. Well, it was a season.
He learned. And
he grew and learned how to take care of, prison guard.
That's right. And can you imagine, the Bible doesn't say this, to be clear, but can you imagine the ego that would have been on any official of the supreme leader?
Yeah.
Can you imagine the cupbearer and the baker? I imagine they're probably in jail or in prison when they get thrown into there, still waiting for the verdict of if they did something wrong or not. They were probably the most egotistical maniacs to Joseph when they pop in there too, thinking that it's just a matter of time before, I'm back. And Joseph, even moving up the rankings, if you will, within the prison, he still had to humble himself again to these guys.
Totally.
Ultimately willing to interpret a dream for them of what they, had, which if you go on and read the story, one ultimately had a dream that Joseph interpreted. They were restored to their position. The baker had a dream that ultimately meant you're going to be killed.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. He told the cupbearer, don't forget about me.
Yeah, which I think is really interesting. I heard a pastor, he said, it's not in the Bible, it's speculation, it's a thought. And every moment that Joseph found himself in, he never tried to manipulate himself out of it. He was just faithful. He was just faithful with what was in front of him, keeping God right and doing his best. But this is the one moment we at least see recorded where we see him actually trying to manipulate something in his favor, because he said, hey, when you go back, have favor on me and tell the Pharaoh, tell the king, right? Tell him about me. And if you think about it, it was 2 more years until Pharaoh had the dream.
Yeah.
And Pharaoh could have had the dream the next day.
Yep.
2 days is 7 days. But somehow, some way, it was almost like, I'm not saying it's there, but this is how I read the Bible and how I see things.
There's a lesson to be learned.
There's a lesson to be learned. And it's almost like God was like, okay, you're not quite ready. You didn't pass that test. You kind of took things in your own hand at this moment.
It's a great thought.
And I'm going to just let another 2 years go by to process this. And 2 years went by. He was still faithful with what he did. The cupbearer forgot about him until Pharaoh had the dream.
And he worked out that little extra agenda that pops in to try to climb a ladder. I love speculative thoughts like that where you can't prove it.
Yeah.
But there's enough there to look at the story and say, whether that's what happened or not, I can relate to it, Rhett, because I have seen God give me victory after victory, promotion after promotion, where it is clear, and so many of you can relate to, it's clear it wasn't me.
Yeah.
It was hopefully integrity that I walked in.
Yeah.
Try to stay competent, but it wasn't completely me. It was a favor you can't explain. And then I can remember maybe a next season of that, I need to say something here.
Yeah.
Try to help give that little boost of recognition. I could easily see Joseph being in that weak moment of, hey, now don't forget about me. How could he forget about you? I mean, you just interpreted a dream. Let it take care of itself.
Exactly.
He's going to remember you.
Right.
But it could have been you just not making something happen.
Trying to force the promise, trying to force a dream. Hey, if I get favor here and get out of here, maybe I can elevate myself. The reason we can relate to it is because we're human and we've experienced these things in our own life, in our own story. And I just think God is faithful enough to love us to the place to where he wants to platform us, so we'll platform him. And if we're not ready character-wise, he'll leave us in that crock pot a little bit longer to work out those, to let the cream rise to the top. Or I think like the refiner's fire, when you're purifying gold, it's like, it's not completely pure. Let's turn the heat up a little bit more here to let some of those impurities rise out that truly need to be out of this thing. So that way we can really make a difference when I need you to make a difference, so that you don't make it about you or try to manipulate another situation, so that, you'll just truly trust me, have faith in me as a father who's going to take care of you and see this dream come to pass in your life without you really doing anything other than just resting in me.
Yeah, because there's no arrival.
Yeah.
It's just a constant state of finding rest in Jesus.
Yeah.
Staying obedient to the voice of Jesus, not being distracted by the foreign voices that constantly bombard us, but being obedient, not trying to force our own agenda to happen, so that we can recognize one day, I'm so glad I didn't try to make that happen, because what you had in store, God, was so much better. Not because it was possessions that you got, not because it was wealth or some kind of accumulation, but because it was peace of knowing I am in the condition I'm in right now only because of Jesus.
It reminds me of I think there's a country song, Thank God for Unanswered Prayers. And I think about moments where I even tried to manipulate heaven, not knowingly. I had a good heart, but God, if you'll just change this, then this will happen, and then this will work in my faith, and then we can get this show on the road, or whatever it might be. And God's like, no, I think it's best that I don't answer that, because it's like Jesus on the cross looking down like they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right? Bro, you don't know what you're praying for right now. If I gave you that right now and answered that prayer in this moment with where you are in this season, that thing would crush you. Your character's not ready. Your development's not ready. Like, yes, one day, but that might come 20, 30 years from now. And if it does, great. If it doesn't, the things you learn through waiting.
And at his mercy, the refiner's fire you're talking about, the stuff that's from him is just going to be refined and turned more pure. But by his grace, he will burn away the stuff that we thought was so important, and he will burn away and it will disappear, and we will get to see the benefit of realizing, thank you, Lord, for not giving me what I thought I wanted. And that's our hope, guys. Our hope is that you would continue to walk in the assignment that God has placed on your life. And today's episode really was the purpose of recognizing that no matter what state you're in an assignment. And if we can be aware of that, it allows us to draw into the pit moments, to the prison moments, and realize there's something to be gained, because with God, nothing is wasted. And we can take exactly what we've been given and we can fulfill that particular God assignment, and it will lead to the progression that comes next. That had we not passed that test, we might not get it. But because, thank you, Lord, because we humbled ourselves, we put our agenda to the side and tried to help others also achieve their God assignments. Wow, I am making more progress than I ever thought.
And if you fast forward, Pharaoh had the dream. Cupbearer's like, hey, I remember this guy. He's an interpreter of dreams. They pull up old Joseph from prison, get him cleaned up, put him right there in front of Pharaoh. He addresses the dream. Hey, the dream is one and the same, basically 7 years of abundance. We're going to have 7 years of so much blessing our land has never experienced before. Good news. But the bad news is we're also going to have 7 years of famine. It's going to be so desolate, like nothing's going to produce, and it's going to be a hard time to get through. So here's what I would encourage you to do, Pharaoh. You need to find a wise man who knows how to manage things in a way to take that years of abundance so that not only are you blessed, but that you use it and you store it and you save it to get you through the years of famine. Mm-hmm. And Pharaoh's like, well, there's no man who can hear from God like you. And he gives, Joseph favor, and he makes him basically his right-hand man.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing Joseph wasn't over was just the fact that he wasn't Pharaoh. He was given the entire authority.
Can you imagine if it would have happened the 2 years before? I wonder if Joseph would have said, I think that I could be the great guy to take it on. And Pharaoh may have still put him in charge, but he would have always wondered, is there an agenda in
Exactly.
this guy?
But he didn't. He just said, may Pharaoh be wise to choose a wise man. Like, hey, I serve you. I'm here. And look at what happened. And so that's where ultimately, here's what I think is so interesting about the dream. Of course, 7 years of abundance happened, 7 years of famine happened. And then it ties back to how his dream became a reality. Because in that 7 years of famine, it was affecting his family, which ultimately became the nation of Israel. And in that 7 years of famine, his family came and they bowed down to Joseph, not recognizing Joseph because it's been 30-something years by this point, which is a whole nother story of how long it takes the process sometimes from immaturity to maturity for things that crock pot to work.
Don't rush it.
Of all the pain that turned into purpose and the character, the perseverance, the time, the things he's learned and how to manage and how all these things he's operating in these gifts because he made the most of every moment. And here he is, and his family's bowing down. They don't recognize him at all because he looks like an Egyptian. He walks like an Egyptian. Cue the Bengals. Right? Right? And so, and then he can't take it anymore. So he opens up, clears the room, said, hey, I'm Joseph, your brother. They're freaking out, but they have a reunion. But the truth is, like, the moment he realized that dream came true in his mind was like in that moment. Here's what I think is just so interesting is that at 16 years old, he thought the dream was about him. But 30 years have passed, and here he is at this point, and the dream came to fruition, but it was never really about him. It was about saving his family and ultimately God's people and an entire nation, as well as, their enemies at that time, if you think about it.
Absolutely.
And so I think I tell young people this, the dream that God always gives you isn't, I know you think it's about you becoming great, but really it's about God using you in a way that he can trust you to when you get to a place, you'll realize it was really never about you. It was always about others.
So true.
And that's where the beauty and the fulfillment comes.
The fulfillment is actually watching someone experience the fulfillment of their assignment, which ironically would be them experiencing others, their fulfillment. And then if you were to draw a picture of that, you see a body being formed, actually doing its work and carrying out the glorifying of God and the pointing people to the love and grace of Jesus.
When Jesus came to reveal the love of the Father, he revealed the love of the Father by serving others. He served us. He imparted and developed into 12 people who then in turn took that and developed into others in which you and I are beneficiaries. I mean, we benefit from the product of development that happened. And so Jesus poured into others. Those 12 poured into others, and there's something powerful that happens when we begin to take our eyes off ourselves, put it onto others through the filter and lens of a relationship with God, ultimate assignment, and the relationship with others, loving God, loving people the way he's loved us in every moment, in every season. And there is truly an incredible joy and a miracle that takes place, not only in our heart and our soul, but even in our situations. Our perspective shifts, and we see things differently through the pain. Just like Joseph, you know what? God is with me in the mundane. God is with me in these moments. And where can I learn? How can I learn from this? Because I know I won't always be here. What can I take away from this so that I continue to move forward toward all that God's called me to as I serve other people?
So college students, 20-somethings, don't fast forward the process. And I understand your temptation to do so. I've been there. And I see what's out there that's getting the attention to want to become what you think this is. it will be short-lived, and I promise it's not what you think. For our 30s, our 40s, our 50s, our 60s, you have not missed it.
Yeah.
The time has not passed you by. You could potentially be walking in the greatest days and the greatest potential of maximizing the assignments that God has on your life right now. But you can look to say, God, redeem some of the stuff that I've overlooked so that I can recognize that develops something, so that it develops something, and so that it developed to where I'm at now, and help me see how I can redeem and let this become a God assignment so that I can fulfill it, that I can bring you the greatest glory that you gave a capacity for me to give you, and that I can point as many people to your glory so that they can fulfill their capacity of being carriers of your glory, Jesus.
Your best is not behind you. It's right before you. And it's not tomorrow, it's today. And if you're in your 60s or 70s and you're listening, or even 80s, man, what I would give and what people would give to cherish the wisdom that we can learn from you. And you might be thinking, well, I didn't do everything right. Exactly. There's so much that we could learn from you, being able to take a moment in time to go, look, here's where I got things wrong. And here's how it sidewinded me to all these different places, but God. And the things I would do to give back the time to be where you are in 20-something, 30-something, 40s, 50, 60 even. It goes back to what you said, I think, in one of our other episodes. It really stood out to me, Justin. You said in your story, Rhett, it was maybe one step forward, two steps back, but the one step forward is so much bigger and greater than we could ever take on our own because it was a God step. And that's the redemption and the beauty. And I just believe that if I were the enemy, I would do everything I possibly could to create isolation or silos between old, middle-aged, and young, and disconnect. You're young and you can't connect to the 30 or the 40 or the 80 or vice versa. And if I were the enemy, that's what I would do. And God said, no, we need each other. And we can learn from each other, and we're a body, and there's wisdom to be had in both the zeal of a youth, in that, oh man, just come on, man, let me loose. I don't want to go through I want to be the microwave. Let's go. I got this, right? And then the older person who can sit there and have a conversation for 3 hours and talk at this pace and be able to enjoy how to slow down. And the zeal is important, but the wisdom of how to implement that zeal in a way that will sustain you in your life and your family for generations to come. Well, all right. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of Armchair Authentic, a podcast with Rhett and Justin. It really is our hope to help you fulfill your God assignments through having real conversations about real life with real people. Well, we're looking forward to next week's episode, but before we get there, we wanted to take a moment and say thank you so much to every single one of you who have taken the time to rate and review the podcast. Man, it means so much to us because it really does help us serve people well, and especially for those who have yet to join us on this journey. As always, please follow us on formerly known as Twitter, now X, at Armchair Auth Pod, or you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Armchair Authentic. And as always, we want to hear from you, and we want to include you in on this podcast. And the best way we can do that is for you to email us at info@armchairauthentic.com.